Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Romina Ichon. This podcast is recorded from a recent webinar on distance and online learning options for parents and children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our panel includes PRI Senior Fellow in Education Studies, Lance Azumi, Dr. Tonya Ochonma, Education Services Specialist in the Northern California Army Battalion, Michael Olaya, Head of Dexter Online Learning Program in Texas, Carrie McDonald, Fellow at the Cato Institute and author of Unschooling, and Sarah Bailey, founder of the Homeschooling Learning Center. Our panel of experts discusses the many options available to parents and give practical advice to those who are thinking of online learning options for their children. Here's Evan Harris, PRI's Manager of Media and Outreach, who hosted the webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us. This is our second webinar that PRI's done. It's on the distance and online learning options for parents and children during COVID-19. So obviously, as the name applies, we're going to be talking a lot about education today. And, you know, like everything else, how coronavirus has impacted kids going to school and what education looks like now that schools are closed. So today we have an expert panel, and I'm gonna do some name intros real quick in a second. But it runs the board. We have folks from PRI itself to the Army to scholars and homeschool and online experts as well. So we have Dr. Tanjay Ochonma. Did I say that right, Dr. Tanjay?
Yes.
Okay. That was my biggest test, so I think we're good. She is an education services in California Army Battalion of the United States Army. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And next we have Sarah Bailey. Sarah Bailey is the co-founder of the Love of Learning Homeschool Learning Center in Northern California. Sarah, thanks for being here too.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Michael Olay. Michael is CEO of Dexter School in Wichita Falls, Texas. Mike, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
We also have Carrie McDonald. Carrie's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, and she's an adjunct scholar, at the Cato Institute, and the author of the book Unschooling. Carrie, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have our own Lance Azumi. Lance is Senior Director of the Center for Education at PRI. And Lance, thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you, Evan, for putting this webinar together for all of us.
Yeah, I think it'll be great. So let's jump right in. Lance, we've seen such a huge change in the last month and a half. You've written about it a little bit. Who do you think was best prepared? You know, coronavirus came out of nowhere. Schools were shut down along with everything else. Who do you think was best prepared to switch to online and distance learning?
Well, thanks, Evan. Just recently, an analysis came out from the University of Washington system, and they looked actually at a group of charter management organizations, which are actually organizations that run networks of charter schools. And then they compared these group of charter networks to a large group of regular school districts, probably over 80 of them. And so when you actually look at that comparison, one thing you find is that the charter schools were actually, as a whole, much more prepared to pivot to a online or distance learning model. And so you had these charter schools, because oftentimes they actually had online platforms that they were already using, that they were much better prepared to be able to switch when the shelter-in-place orders came down across the country. The researchers there over at the University of Washington system said that in the case of the regular school districts, unfortunately, many of them were not prepared, at all for this. And so you continue to see this, unfortunately. One of the schools that the University of Washington study cited is a charter school that I actually profiled in my latest book, Choosing Diversity, which looks at successful charter schools. And that school is the Success Academy in New York City. And what they've done is they've been able to implement what's called synchronous learning. And so you have basically groups of students and the teacher being able to be put together virtually, and so that learning occurs really in real time. And they've also been very flexible with the use of their teachers. So while this synchronous learning is going on between the teachers and a teacher and the students, you have other teachers who are actually grading papers and doing daily call-in check-in calls with students. So, there's been a lot of, I think, easy pivot for these charter schools in many cases. Closer to home, I had a recent conversation with Dr. Ting's son, who is one of the co-founders of the Natomas Charter School up here in Sacramento area. And the Natomas Charter School is actually an umbrella charter school that has actually several different academies located under its umbrella. And a couple of these academies, one is a virtual learning academy, another one is a homeschool learning academy. And so both of those academies, especially, when I talked to Dr. Sun, they have been able to transition very seamlessly to a distance and online, new world, and so, but I think that what's important when we, look at what's going on, in terms of distance learning, is actually to talk to the kids who are actually having to go through all of this. And so I actually have been interviewing a number of students at various schools to see what life really is like for them now that they're having to do this at home. And so I interviewed a couple of students from Design Tech Charter High School, which is out in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that school actually is another school that I profile in my Choosing Diversity book. But what these students were telling me is that what they're doing is they're doing Zoom conference calls for their actual instruction, but then the school had already a pre-existing very strong online platform, which the school then the teachers will put on assignments and all kinds of resources for the kids to do their assignments. So then transitioning to this distance learning model, where the kids are learning all virtually from home, has been relatively easy for those students at Design Tech. And so the kids who I talked to there said that they've really had a relatively painless transition. I also talked with another student over at John Adams Academy, which is a charter school over here in the Sacramento area, and she was saying that what they use is they use Google Hangouts to be able to receive instruction from their teachers, and then they use Google Classroom, where the teachers will post assignments and they're able to then do their work, and then the kids are actually able to progress at their own speed, so you can actually go way ahead of the schedule if that's what you want to do. So it's actually worked out well for this particular student at John Adams Academy. But as I say, these are success stories, I think, but not all parents, have had that type of success with their children, because some of those schools have not been prepared. And so what I wanted to do here, after chatting about these schools and these students and their experiences, was maybe to ask Sarah Bailey, maybe to also start off and to just, since you're the founder of a homeschool learning center, and also you've homeschooled your own children, you've have had to talk to parents who are now thrust into this situation where they are having to do something that they've never really done before. And so what have you been, advising these parents, as they open this new chapter on their kids' education?
Yes, and I've been getting a lot of phone calls just with that specific question about help on how to homeschool their children. So the buzzword right now is growth mindset, but to me that means a lifelong learner. So if we want our children to be lifelong learners, then there really is no educational emergency. And I think a lot of parents feel that there is one because their child isn't busy 6 hours a day anymore. They're getting it done in maybe 2 hours, or maybe they're having lots of tears and frustration at home. So my advice to parents that are dealing with the tears and frustration would be to give their teacher a call and see what can be removed from the child's plate, because oftentimes they're sending home busy work and things that maybe aren't necessary, or talk to the teacher about alternatives, the creative alternatives, like taking your child into the kitchen and baking and cooking with them. Those are great for math skills. Doing laundry is great for learning how to match, or learning colors for younger children, and working on the family budget, teaching your older children how to create a budget for grocery shopping or needs versus wants is great, and just life skills. So the things that we can teach our children at home while we have time with them will really benefit them for the rest of their lives. And the other thing I really encourage parents to do right now is to let their children know that they are a joy to have, that they're a joy to be around, because the damage that we could do by saying, oh, I just can't wait for school to start again, I'm so tired of this, could be lifelong. So be really careful with your word choice while your children are around. If you want to talk to your adult friends about how much this is driving you crazy, that's one thing, but your children need to hear that you love them and that you want them around.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, when you and I have talked, you've mentioned that the thing that parents should try to avoid, at least certainly in these initial stages, is not to stress out over it.
Right. Take a deep breath. It's all going to be okay. So.
Well, I think that there's probably a collective sigh all around the country. Carrie, you wrote a book in 2019 called Unschooled, which is I highly recommend to anyone who's listening to this webinar to get a copy of that book. It's one of the best books on learning at home that any parent would ever be able to purchase. But from your book and the things you learned and your findings, so what pertinence do you find with this COVID crisis that we're going through right now, and those findings from your book?
Right. Well, thanks, Lance. I would echo what Sarah said, that a lot of families, I think, are feeling really stressed and frustrated right now, in particular, trying to replicate school at home. Many school districts, of course, trying as best they can to provide virtual learning or packets of workbooks and worksheets at home. And I think it's difficult for everybody, for teachers, for parents, and for learners. But to the extent that families can disconnect from those schooled expectations and those curriculum directives, like Sarah said, take the time to get to know their children, to participate in these wonderful resources that are being available online now, and stop trying to be sort of the curriculum enforcer as a parent. I think it will make a lot of these frustrations less severe and can actually make this whole experience more tolerable for everybody. It's interesting that even though, of course, what we're all encountering now is nothing like authentic homeschooling. We're all, isolated from our communities and disconnected from the people, places, and things around us. I do think it's interesting that a newly released study by EdChoice found that respondents, families going through this pandemic, most of them, the majority of them, have a more favorable opinion of homeschooling, even though we're all kind of going through this isolated experience at this time. And so I'd say to those families that if you think that this is a good experience and that you have a more favorable opinion of homeschooling as a result of the coronavirus schooling, just wait till you see the real thing, where you are really immersed in your community and interacting with mentors and peers and other groups. But I do think, and I've also gotten messages and emails from families and parents in particular who've said, I've always been curious about homeschooling. It's something I've wanted to experiment with, but I lacked that inertia to give it a try. And now they have this opportunity to really step back and learn alongside their children. Again, tap into these incredible online resources that are sprouting almost daily. Most of them are free. And really give homeschooling a try, again, as contrived as this is for all of us. And some of them have said they do plan to continue homeschooling or searching for these other alternatives to school, like virtual learning or hybrid homeschooling models post-pandemic. So I would be surprised if we don't see an uptick in families choosing homeschooling or some of these other types of schooling alternatives when this ends.
And I think, Carrie, you bring up a good point that, what we're going through right now with this pandemic and type of homeschooling that is going on in most parents' homes right now is very much an anomaly when it comes to like actual homeschooling, the real homeschooling experience. I mean, this type of isolation that is going on is not the norm. I think that may be the stereotype that people have about homeschooling, but that is not the norm. And you have homeschooled or unschooled your own children. And could you just say a quick word about how that is different than what we're going through today?
Right. I mean, I think most homeschoolers will tell you that they spend more of their time outside of their homes than inside of their homes, really being immersed in their larger community, taking classes, interacting with friends, engaging in mentoring experiences and apprenticeship experiences. And actually, recent research by Daniel Hamlin out of the University of Oklahoma looked at sort of the socialization of homeschoolers compared to their schooled peers and found that homeschoolers have very high rates of what he calls cultural capital. They're going to the library very frequently, going to museums, going to cultural events, musical events, and athletic events in their community, in some cases to a much greater degree than their schooled peers, because of course they have so much more freedom and flexibility with their days and the ability to kind of follow their children's interests. So I do think it's a myth that young people who are homeschooled are isolated from their communities. I think it's really the exact opposite. And I just sort of add one other piece to that. I think the origins of this stereotype of homeschooling families being isolated really goes back to the beginning of the homeschooling movement, 1970s and through the 1980s. Homeschooling wasn't legally recognized in all 50 states until the mid-1990s. And so prior to that, in many states, families that chose homeschooling were persecuted and had to endure legal battles in many cases to have the right to homeschool their children. In some cases, if they were allowed or if homeschooling was tolerated, they were told that they had to keep their kids inside during school hours, that they couldn't be out in their communities. So I do think that some of this lingering stereotype about homeschool being disconnected from their community harkens back to that time when they were forced to be disconnected from their communities because it wasn't legally recognized in all places.
Mm-hmm. No, very true, very true. Well, let me go to Dr. Tanjo Chanma, who is one of my long and great friends. Dr. Chanma and I have known each other for many, many years. I've done a lot of volunteer work with the U.S. Army, so I've known Dr. Chanma in that capacity for many years, and it's been a great friendship. And for people who are watching right now, in addition to being the education services specialist for the Army Battalion up here in Northern California, she's also an officer, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, and just returned from a long deployment in the Middle East. So, I want to thank Dr. Chanma for her, both what she does here as a civilian and also for her service in uniform. So thank you very much. And I also wanted to ask you, though, Dr. Chanma, I think during this pandemic, the public, if they're watching television, if they see the United States Army, the thing that pops to mind is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other members of the Army who are building temporary hospital beds out there in, various places around the country. And, of course, that is, very important. But one of the things that I think people may not know about is the fact that the U.S. Army also has a very strong online education program, which is free and it requires no enlistment obligation, but basically a gift from the Army to the American people called March to Success. I wonder if you wanted to chat a little bit about that.
Yes, and thank you, Lance. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And you had alluded to the Army field hospitals that are going up around the country in support of COVID-19. The Army is comprised of specialized and elite teams. They make a real difference in the world and to this nation. So March to Success is a very unique program. It's an online self-paced course designed to improve students' academic achievement in English, math, and science. It also helps improve standardized test scores. The program was designed by Peterson and College Option Foundations, the leaders in the industry of standardized testing. And we push that a lot because we want to see high school students move on, go to college, be prepared. So these courses help build awareness of college and career options, as well as increase graduation rates. Now, March to Success is absolutely free. There is no obligation to the U.S. Army. It's totally the Army's gift to America's youth. But this program also helps with improving SAT scores, mandated assessment examinations, college entrance exams, applying for a job. So there are a wealth of resources on this site to prepare students for their future, whether they're going into government service, public service, the military, any of those things. So those resources are definitely available and they're absolutely free. Here recently, I had a couple of high school principals give me a call about the program. And one of the things that I noticed in California, at least in Northern Sacramento Unified School District, teachers are looking for options to expand their students' knowledge. They want these young folks to graduate from high school. Unfortunately, we're in this graduation time frame where no decision has been made. We're in a holding pattern. So once those issues are worked out, I really hope to see these graduation rates improve, the seniors move on to areas where they can contribute to society. But March to Success could definitely enable that process.
So let me ask you, Tanja, if parents, want to access, March to Success, would they go to the website? How would they actually get on and see what March to Success has to offer?
So you would go to the website, and the website is marchtosuccess.com. And I always tell my homeschoolers that it's a great opportunity to use March to Success as a bridge between middle school and high school. So the program creates an individualized curriculum for each particular student. So you work at your own pace with that. That's one of the benefits about the program. But definitely go into marchtosuccess.com. You'll go through a short tutorial just to give you an overview of the program, what some of the options are. And once you do that, you start going through the content from there. So the program is designed for age 12 and above. So for those little ones, it does have a component on there where you can work on those math, English, and science skills. So it's something for each grade level.
Well, that's terrific. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other, really interesting programs that I've found recently is the Dexter Online program, which is based out of Texas. And we're pleased to have Michael Alaya, who is the CEO of the Dexter Program. And, we've had some great conversations recently. Michael, could you tell us about the Dexter Program and, what it has to offer, not just, kids in the Texas area, of course, but kids throughout the country and even around the world?
Sure. So at Dexter, we're building the school of the future. I'm actually on campus right now, only in spirit, if you're wondering why these kids haven't moved yet, because it's a green screen. But we have a campus in Wichita Falls, Texas, and North Texas, a little above Dallas. And we're a blended learning program. So students can attend Dexter on campus. They can be remote or a combination of both. And really just focus on three core things, doing three things really well. The first is developing a core knowledge curriculum. So we're big fans of E.D. Hirsch. Except we've extended the notion of cultural literacy slightly. So we include things like computer programming and systems thinking and design thinking. Curriculum really, really matters. The second piece is high quality direct instruction. We think great instructors, great teaching matters. And that's a whole kind of interesting bag of worms. We talk about kind of modern day progressive education that's kind of de-emphasize the importance of direct instruction. So we think teaching really matters. And the third piece is that we think individual students need more one-to-one mentoring and small group instruction. And if you can do those three things really well, you can do a really high quality education. And at Dexter, what we're really excited about, and really our core mission, is to provide this high quality education at an affordable price. We want to make private school affordable. And we have a really interesting group of students that go to Dexter. We have a ton of homeschool families because it's this more flexible model. And so in response to COVID, we released our online program. We're a bunch of engineers, so we developed our own learning management system and software suite. So you mentioned earlier in the webinar, schools having to pivot. We didn't have to pivot. This is what we're already doing. We already had the infrastructure in place, specifically that direct instruction piece. And so we offer that up to the world at large. And so now we have over 1,000 students on the Dexter platform receiving direct instruction from some incredible, incredible instructors. We're talking about Gordon Hamilton, a mathematician, or we get these incredible experts like Aubrey de Grey. And so it's just been a really incredible piece, offering kind of our infrastructure to all these students that for the most part don't really have it.
That's great. And, I attended, one of your classes, and it was really amazing to actually attend something where, when we think about online learning, I think people don't really have a real understanding of what the possibilities are. It's not just maybe accessing, an assignment, or watching a pre-recorded lecture by somebody. But you can actually, as a student and the teacher, be able to interact in real time. And I watched one of your computer coding classes, and you were actually teaching that course, and there were questions being sent in by students in real time, and you were answering them. And also, too, you were playing a logic game against one of your students, in real time, during the class. Could you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. I think if any of the viewers are really interested in where this is all headed, I would encourage them to go to Twitch and just to see what this new medium actually looks like. Because you're exactly right. When you think of online learning, you think of Khan Academy, these kind of dead videos that you just passively watch. Whereas we've realized that these interactive live streams, it's a two-way medium. It's participatory. And I've taught in many, many classrooms, and I was really hesitant to think that you could replace the magic of being like that felt presence of immediate experience, actually reading the audience and kind of giving feedback. I've actually found that instruction via interactive live stream is better, which is completely mind-blowing. So a few core ideas there. We have a real-time chat. And so the students are able to comment and ask questions in real time. The most important piece there, it has to be moderated. So you can imagine if you have hundreds of kids in an interactive lesson, it needs to be moderated chat. So the signal to noise ratio is really, really high. This is actually a really important thing because I've noticed some of the usernames. And so I've noticed maybe a young girl comments on a lesson. She never would have talked in class because it's very much biased towards the kid that wants to speak up. Whereas it's a very safe space to actually interact. And so the interaction has been really incredible. And that's really important. I was watching a live stream on Dexter last week. We had a guest poet, and she was doing a lesson on this poem. And one of the chat questions was, what does widow mean? And the student didn't know what widow meant. And the instructor was able to notice that and to recognize that she had the background knowledge, address it. And if that student wasn't in that safe space, she wouldn't have asked that question. And how many other students missed that as well? So the interactive chat has been really interesting. But then you have features like, I can poll the audience to get a good sense of kind of broadly speaking, how well the students kind of understand the material. We can bring in guests. So again, we bring in like futurists and poets and all types of crazy people that are able to interact with our students. And then the third piece is that we can actually bring in other students as well. And so imagine, all the kids love YouTube videos. Imagine if your YouTube video talked back to you. And so we're finding that in terms of engagement and direct instruction, it's an incredible new medium that's just now being explored. And for what that means for schools, broadly speaking, it's really, really interesting. I mean, you think about it. Right now, the average school district has, say, dozens of algebra teachers teaching the same lecture across the whole district. Some of them doing okay, some doing mediocre, some doing well. What if you found the very best algebra teacher for that school district, did an interactive live stream, put a bunch of production value? That's how they access direct instruction. You've now liberated the other teachers to do small group instruction, one-to-one mentoring in the spirit of Benjamin Bloom. So we're really excited to see kind of what structurally this will do over the next few years.
Oh, that's great. Let me turn it over to Evan.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. And I'll go right back to you. But it's been interesting hearing these different models. I think on that note, will there be a big sea change in education from the coronavirus? Is this kind of, Michael talks about their program already being ready to go online. Will there be a big change somewhere when things try to go back to normal?
Well, I think there is going to be a big change, and I think that Carrie is right when she cited, some of those recent research statistics showing that, even given all the bumps in the road that have been going on over the last couple months, that parents are, becoming more favorable, to maybe changing their views about homeschooling and distance learning, online learning. But I think that one of the things that is going to be a big change, that will have to be a big change if the conventional school systems really want to survive in the future, especially given the fact that now more parents and their children are going to become more familiar with online learning, is that the teachers themselves are going to have to become better trained in how to deliver distance learning, online learning. I was just talking with Dr. Ochanma, a few days ago, and she was telling me about her 15-year-old niece who was going to be on a Zoom call with one of her teachers, and the teacher who actually called the Zoom meeting actually had to ask Dr. Ochanma's niece how to actually do Zoom. And so I think there's going to have to be a huge increase in professional development or teacher training for these teachers right now to be able to do anything close to what, for example, Michael Elia is talking about, with Dexter Online. One of the things that I did a couple years ago was to co-author a book called Moonshots in Education, where I looked at the model of blended learning, which is part brick and mortar instruction and part online learning. And what I found is that, unfortunately, in this country, we have a huge gap in the level of teacher training for online education. And so if you compare the United States with, let's say, South Korea or Singapore or a lot of those other countries in the Far East, that the United States has virtually next to nothing when it comes to teacher training and professional development. Whereas in those countries, it's part and parcel of the training programs for those teachers in those countries, which is why, for example, in Singapore, you can have the whole country will do an e-learning week. And so that the teachers will teach online, teach through distance learning. And that's, and because all the teachers are able to do that, and of course all the students have been learning that way, it's very easy for them to do that. How great would it be if that were the case in this country where we were as prepared for that? So I think that, there will be a great change, but I do think that, in order for that change to be as great as maybe people would like it to be, you're going to have to get some of these pieces in place before you're going to be able to see that huge change. It's not going to be like, how the medical experts are saying, it's not like flipping a switch, right? It's going to be more like, well, at least when it comes to the, the institution, our education institutions, it's more like trying to steer the Titanic. So, let's hope it doesn't hit the iceberg. So, with that, let me ask Sarah, again, as a homeschooling practitioner and someone who's now been advising, parents who are now in this situation of homeschooling their children. I mean, what are some of the myths that you're trying to dispel, when you're talking to these parents who, have no real idea about, trying to school their kids at home?
Well, I'd like to refer back to what Carrie said, that when we're normally homeschooling and not in a pandemic, our kids are not home very often. They're out in the community. They're out doing things. So I really feel like people saying that they're all homeschooling right now is a misnomer. They're just educating from home more. Like, the work is being provided, everything's provided for the child. It's not that the parents are going out and researching what would be best or the best way to educate their child or really invest it in homeschooling. So the counsel that I always give parents when they're thinking about homeschooling is go to the library. I realize they're closed right now, but go to the library and check out every single book you can on homeschooling. And you'll usually get a stack pretty big. Take it home and thumb through them all and figure out what is your philosophy and what resonates with you as a family, because every family will homeschool different, and maybe you'll homeschool every child differently. But if you don't begin with the end in mind, you'll give up really quickly, because parents, it's exhausting if you don't have the end goal of what you want for your children. And so, I would say that one of the fallacies with homeschooling is that we don't socialize our children. And people ask me that all the time. How about socialization? I don't see what's so great, though, about putting your child in a classroom with 30 other kids and one teacher for socialization. I feel like that's more of a dog-eat-dog world. They're not really learning real-life social skills. But if you are homeschooling and your child's around multi-age groups and going, like Carrie said, to museums and cultural events, they are going to get a socialization that's much more true to real life.
And I certainly agree with that. And you mentioned online or the resources available to students who are now being schooled at home. Carrie, you've written about that, and so you've heard Michael Laya and Dr. Ochanma speak about two of these resources that are available, but there are actually hundreds out there of various online resources available to parents, and all of which are free. Would you mind chatting about that for a bit?
Right. I have an article up at the Cato Institute's website where I talk about all of the many of the free online learning resources that are sprouting. There's been some that, of course, have been around for a while, like Khan Academy, sort of the leader in online, high quality, free instructional videos that have been used both inside and outside of schools for years. Khan Academy has ramped up much of their content. They're now providing lesson plans or guidelines for how to go about a day with children. So they're really trying to provide some additional resources there. Other sites like Coursera, which is an online provider of online courses, both sort of at the K-12 level and also very much in the college level and beyond. Many of their courses are now being offered for free. You see other programs like Duolingo, which is a foreign language learning software that's been free since its inception. They're getting a lot of hits now, and other foreign language learning software programs are also coming online and providing their services for free. I think you see that trend as well. You'll see organizations and businesses that in the past have required you to pay for their services now offering many of those services for free. For example, Varsity Tutors is an online tutoring platform where you pay for one-on-one tutoring, typically online, and they're offering many of their services now for free. So there's just an abundance of resources. And then you add in these other sort of spontaneous learning tools that are sprouting, world famous authors reading their books online real time, or providing story writing workshops, or you'll have illustrators offering artistic instruction online for free. You have 2,500 museums around the world that have free virtual tours on their websites, and many museums are also leading the way in providing more free online content during this time. So it's just a wonderful time to focus on the learning that can happen. I think Sarah mentioned this in her initial remarks, that there's so many headlines and so much attention focusing on coronavirus learning loss or the learning that isn't happening this spring. And I think instead, if we can shift to focus on all the learning that is happening or that we have the ability to tap into, we'll be surprised at how much young people can and do learn in what really is an unprecedented moment for them that will shape their childhood and really define their futures for decades to come.
Absolutely right. Let me ask, going from that general discussion about online resources back to one specific resource, the March to Success program from the Army. Dr. Ochanma, we were talking, you and I, about the specific learning modules in STEM subjects that are available to students. So when students access the March to Success program, it's not just a bunch of practice questions. There's actual instruction going on through March to Success. So would you be able to talk to us about that?
Yes, absolutely. And as we transition into the next phase, I know with the high school students that are going off to college, and for the ones that are seeking a career within the STEM program, the Army has STEM content within March to Success. We have the Science Hub, the Math Hub, Social Science, and Technology Hub. And within each hub, there are corresponding lesson plans and practice tests that students could use to improve their standardized test scores or to improve their awareness of that particular subject content. As these students seek careers within the STEM program, you know, cybersecurity is a really big one. Engineering is the largest. Those opportunities are there. So being aware of those programs, what they have to offer, is crucial. I know within March to Success, there's an area called the Zero Threat Hour, and that is geared toward video gaming, raising SAT, ACT scores, and it's a video game. So it's very interactive, easy to use, what our kids are into nowadays, but it creates a very fun environment. So it makes learning an opportunity as well as fun for that particular individual.
Oh, that's great. So Michael, let me ask you, you know, you've been doing the online program has been available for free, I believe, to your people who are signing up for it, at least, you know, for a certain amount of time during this pandemic. So how have you seen the both the increase in the number of people interested in your program, and then also, has there been any kind of like evolution in the way, you know, things that you're learning about, you know, your online program as you're maybe getting more interest from people?
Sure, we've definitely made a distinction between our full-time school and the Dexter Live program. We're calling the Dexter Live program more of an edutainment program, which is an interesting thing to think about. Actually, thinking about when I was a kid, I think the edutainment was much better than nowadays. I mean, kids have like Khan Academy now, but we had Oregon Trail, we had Math Blasters. So I think we need to make these like very fun and engaging. But it has made me think a lot about, you know, what will this mean over the next few years? And I think certainly we're probably going to overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term. You mentioned teacher training. I'm not so sure. I think we should actually question, what is that word teacher? What does that mean in the future? Our key insight is that we have to decouple the role of the educator. You know, so right now they're just juggling way too many plates. It'd be a lot like if your pilot also designed the airplane and also has to serve drinks. And so that's a key thing that we realize, is that you need to very clearly decouple these roles. You know, so curriculum needs to be separate, direct instruction needs to be separate, grading needs to be separate, mentoring needs to be separate, and that really, really changes the ballgame. That's one thing that we've really learned, is that you need to decouple these things. And then that also applies to the institution as well. You know, the Catholic Church wasn't replaced by a similar monolithic institution. So I think what we're going to see is that you can't really point to, oh, that's what changed everything. That's what, you know, revolutionized everything. It's going to be this kind of this field of 1,000 flowers blooming. And we think our edutainment platform is one of those flowers.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, you know, I mentioned earlier this University of Washington system study looking at the comparing charter schools and regular public schools, and you know, I mentioned that they had cited the Success Academy out in New York City. And one of the things that they did, you know, was that they basically decoupled, like you were saying, between the person who was actually teaching the course, but then there were other teachers who were assigned different tasks. So it wasn't like, you know, they were all going to have to be jack of all trades, you know, so you had a little bit more specialization, and which makes more sense, especially, you know, when you're, doing things online, and you can reach more people, you know, the person teaching. I mean, because your class, for example, that I viewed on computer coding, how many people are you getting in your classes now?
They're on the order of 100 kids. So on the platform total, and it's interesting, we had to pump the brakes on signups because we just got kind of overwhelmed with how many people were joining it. So we kind of rebuilt the system. We're going to do another launch next week. But again, we could imagine a situation where you have thousands of kids in a virtual lecture hall. And think about what that would mean for like cultural literacy and cultural unity. If every kid learned from the same mathematician geometry, for instance. Because I think that's a key thing we're not really thinking about, is this cultural unity, this shared language, shared understanding. So I'm really excited what it would mean. Because this is a weird thing I've learned with working with so many school districts, is that even though we have these hyper-centralized systems, they're also like very fragmented. And there's no uniformity, which has been a really interesting kind of observation.
Yeah, that's great. That's right. Evan.
Yeah, Lance, let's look at some of the colleges. Recently, there was a junior college up here, Sierra College. They're going to be completely online this fall. I believe a school down south, maybe one of the UCs, announced as well. What do you think that means for colleges looking ahead? And I'm even going to throw out, what are the benefits of some of the colleges maybe embracing more of this online learning, maybe with, there's always the stories about classes being impacted and you have to wait 3 semesters or another semester to take a class. What could we see after the coronavirus with colleges adopting some of these same principles?
Well, I think that you're probably going to see some of the same reactions from kids at the students at the college level that you see at the K-12 level. That they may be able to do their a lot of their work without having to go through a lot of the rigmarole of actually being on campus. And it may be that you could also, end up not having to listen to harangues from your professor, And so, I know that in the community college system, they are going more towards some online models, and as you mentioned, the UC as well. So I think that, you're going to see change there. How fast it's going to be, it's hard to tell. But I do think that there will be greater online presence and availability now in the wake of this. And it could well be again that if students are able to really receive a lot of their instruction online, and the costs, of course, are much less for doing that. And given the amount of debt that our students are carrying because of the huge edifice that is now current brick and mortar higher education, I mean, could you end up having to being able to reduce that debt load because you actually don't need a good chunk of that edifice? So I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to look very closely at and see, both in terms of are the students getting the academic bang, and are they getting the bang for the buck, compared to, what they were before. So, let me ask, since you asked me about what the things might look like in the future for higher education, let me ask our homeschool practitioner, Sarah, what do you think, is the future holding for homeschooling after this?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of it will stay the same because parents will still be in charge of controlling what comes into the home or choosing classes for their younger children. I believe by the time a child's in junior high or high school, they should be a full partner in planning their schedule and what classes they're interested in. A lot of homeschooling families already use online classes, but I'm super excited about this March to Success. I had no idea about that. I'm going to spread that far and wide. And also the Dexter School. It sounds amazing for the homeschooling community. But a lot of our classes are really small that our homeschoolers take, or with private tutors. A lot of high schoolers will meet with a mentor one-on-one or work in an office building, learning the skills that maybe they want to use as they get older. So I think that homeschoolers might take more advantage of these online courses, but I think that we'll stay the course in a lot of ways because we've already pulled back from the traditional system.
Let me ask real quickly as a follow-up. You mentioned, older kids who by the time they're in late middle school or high school, they become more partners with their parents. And tell me, I think that a lot of parents who are now being thrust into this situation, think that, okay, I can handle my first grader and, doing a basic arithmetic with my first grader, but how do I, homeschool like a older child, someone in high school? Now, at your homeschool learning center, you had courses at your learning center for older students. So say a quick word about that.
Yeah, so I'll just say what I do personally for my family. What we would do once the kids got to high school is we would meet for breakfast, say on Monday morning. and have a one-on-one meeting about what their goals were, what they wanted to accomplish that week, what their classes were, what was due. And then it was up to them to set their schedule and return and report. I would help them set up mentors, help them find classes they're interested in, and make sure they're meeting their high school requirements. But beyond that, they were full participants and deciding how to get their work done. And I think those life skills is what sets them apart when they get to college, because they get it. They know how to set their schedule. They know how to get things done, and they're self-motivated. So that's what we try to help all parents learn through that homeschooling model, is to help their children become self-sufficient.
And Carrie, let me ask you. Evan had asked me what I thought would be the future in higher education. What are your thoughts about what the future is going to be like, both in K-12 and maybe in higher education as well, going forward? I mean, you had mentioned in your book Unschooled that currently we have probably roughly 2 million students being homeschooled. What do you see as being the future, and how things are going to pan out?
Right. Well, I would agree with Sarah that I think those 2 million homeschoolers will just go back to the way life was, where they are finally back in their communities and taking classes and various programs. I think the most growth, though, will be in families that are now open to new ways of living and learning. We already see speculation that there'll be more remote workers post-pandemic, that many employers will realize there's some benefits to having virtual workers, and many employees themselves might prefer to work from home. And if that happens, then I think it will also lead to potentially more of these alternatives to school for families. If families have some more flexibility with their work, they'll also be able to give that flexibility to their children in terms of education. And that's where I think they'll start to see some of these hybrid homeschooling programs, similar to what Sarah's Learning Center might offer, other kinds of hybrid charter school programs where you might be on site a couple of days a week at a building or at some kind of learning space, and then the rest of the time you're learning at home or through classes in your community. And then families will realize, I really can tailor an education for my child. I can be the facilitator, but I don't have to be the instructor. I can connect them to available community resources. So I think we'll see more of that. And then to the higher ed piece, it's sort of related, but I think some of these innovative programs that have sprouted over the past couple of years, and I'm thinking in particular of ASU Prep Digital, right? The Arizona State University Prep Digital program, which provides online learning and degree programs, diploma programs for kids in Arizona, but as well as across the country, to receive online high school diploma that's rigorous, but also earn college credits. And so they're able to come out with a high school diploma as well as many credits toward an undergraduate degree, whether it's at Arizona State or transferred to other colleges or universities. It defrays a lot of the cost of college. And I think we'll see more and more colleges respond and parents demand these types of innovative programs, particularly now that some of the stigma around online learning may go away.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's a really good early college program actually down in Bakersfield College down in Central California. Let me ask Dr. Ochanma, you talk with a lot of educators, school board members, superintendents, going forward now that they've had to deal with this COVID crisis. What do you see their, reaction to something like March to Success, going forward, that they'll have a better appreciation for it?
I think I see the educators as being more open-minded in sharing information. It's okay to explore non-traditional avenues to employment, such as maybe the U.S. Army or joining a service or going civil service, those kinds of things. So I see higher education focusing more on academic discipline, whereas in most of the industries that we're currently learning, as we see every day, the CDC, those types of people, but building that leadership, building character. So I see them being more open-minded to exploring non-traditional industries and giving students the information and realizing that it's a resource, not a mandate. So although you don't need you don't have to join the March to Success to be a part of the military. This was something the Army created for America's youth. So we want you to be successful. So I hope that educators would see this as an opportunity of talking about those healthcare careers, cybersecurity, engineering. They are available, and whether you use those for the Army or a different industry, we're still able to provide that. So I really hope going forward that there's more of an open mind in terms of exploring all avenues for a student to reach their maximum potential.
And finally, let me ask Michael about you've created your Dexter program. What do you see, just generally speaking, for education in the online and distance learning space going forward, since you're right in the middle of the ground floor and starting up something?
Yeah, I think that distinction between online and offline will start to blur, and we're going to get this much more blended model, kind of described as Carrie. Alan Kay made this great quote: "The best way to create the future, or to predict the future, is to create it." And so we really think that for this whole conversation, the future of education is going to be a radically affordable private education system, where right now there's this huge variability of experience based off your geography and your economic background. It's really an artisan model. Anyone that watched the Ken Robinson lecture, I actually think that was completely wrong now that I think about it. We don't have a factory model. We don't have an input-output that's reliable with QA. We could only be so lucky. We actually have a highly artisan model. And so we want to shift it to a very reliable, scalable system with thousands of campuses all across the world. We want high quality, low cost. I think that's going to be the future. And so there's not going to be this distinction between online, offline. It'll be flexible. It'll be like anything else in the free market.
That's terrific. Evan.
Yeah, so I think we're at the end of our normal questions, but Lance and I wanted to surprise all of you and just do a couple lightning round fun questions, and then we'll be finished up. So Michael, why don't we start with you, and everyone can go through and answer. What's a hobby or project or something you've been working on since the shelter in place started?
I have been playing a lot more chess.com.
Ah, very cool. Dr. Ochama, what about you?
I have rearranged my entire garage. I've been trying to do that forever. So it is spotless. Everything in there is in order. So that's been my whole mission during this quarantine time.
That sounds amazing and terrifying all at once. Carrie, what about you?
Well, one of the free resources that has appeared during the pandemic is that audible.com has been offering many of its books for free streaming. So I've been listening to the 65 hours of Atlas Shrugged after several years reading it before. So that's been enjoyable.
Nice. Sarah, what about you?
I painted a Harry Potter dresser, and I make it look like old luggage. It's really fun. Keeps me busy. My husband likes it because I don't tear apart the house. So.
Lance, what about you?
Well, actually, I did one of the most fun things I've done through this entire pandemic this past weekend. I actually went on another webinar that was a watercolor painting webinar that taught you how to paint a portrait of your pet. And so I had not done watercolor since I was probably in kindergarten. And so, and I'm not an artist, but I don't know if you can see, you can't really see it, but I painted a picture of my two cats. And so I picked up watercolor painting of pets as my hobby.
Very nice. Maybe next webinar we'll auction that off live.
It's a great piece.
My only other one was a little prediction. Will there be in-class school this fall? Michael?
It depends on the geography.
Yes or no? In Texas?
Yes.
Dr. Ochama?
No, I don't think so.
Carrie?
Hard to say, but I think if so, it will be staggered. It will be these kind of, different enrollment options. If you have children who live with grandparents, for example, they may not be coming. So I think we'll still have this hybrid even in the fall.
Good point. Sarah?
I don't think for us in California, the public schools will be back open, but we plan, because we're small enough, we should be able to open back up.
Lance?
I think that I agree with Michael, actually. I think that it probably does depend a lot on geography, and the different states. I mean, Sarah's right. You don't know what's going to happen here in California, but, places like, South Dakota, which never really locked down, I'm sure that they'll probably end up having regular school in the fall. I think a lot of it also has to do with, how fast the vaccine comes online. And, if you have a vaccine that comes out before the end of 2020, I think a lot of the country could end up being back at school.
Great. All right, guys. Well, I think we're about at time. So thank you. Thank you for the panelists. Great to hear. I just listen most of the time. I definitely am going to go look up resources for our kids. But quick plug for our next event is May 20th with our President and CEO, Sally Pipes. We're going to be talking about the dangers of Medicare for all. But thank you, everyone watching, and hope everyone stays safe and healthy through this. Thank you.
Special thanks to Lance Izumi, Dr. Tonya Okoma, Michael Alaya, Carrie McDonald, Sarah Bailey, and to our host, Evan Harris. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Marina Ichwan. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.